And now let me crank up the,
We're all sitting here in our lairs.
I know. Okay, here we go. We get this out of the way. Oops. I screwed up. Sorry. Hold on. I'm going to have to pedal through this. I had it all set up because this is what we did last time.
Right.
Hold on. Let me get out. Let me get out of this. And let me just go fix the. Okay.
This is so funny. I read the whole thing of
Here it is.
what's the book? The pop book.
There were two popular books here. Okay, let's see if this did it. That didn't do it. Okay, hold on. I'm just gonna.
That was it.
The two books. One was in the early '80s called Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and then there was one in the early 2000s that was called the Da Vinci Code.
Yeah, that's it.
That had the same story. What's crazy is the guy who wrote the Da Vinci Code said, "Oh yeah, I looked at the other book, but I didn't use it." But I mean, the story's the same. So I can't figure out how he figures he didn't, use it. So, but what we're going to do here tonight is run through the Knights Templar, who actually, as we'll see, came to the Americas for centuries. They were running around in the Americas, and then we're going to go back to what's at the top, which is the Sinclairs that were in Scotland and had all these ties to the Knights Templar after the Knights Templar had their falling out with the Pope and the King of France. So I'm just going to skip ahead here to.
I think this is really the two threads of my two, ancestral lines, my two lineages. My mother was Norwegian and English, and my father was French and English.
So
So anyway, I just
Yeah.
think there's
No, there's something here that's really bizarre, and it's worth talking about. I think the Knights Templar had all kinds of their basic symbol was white with a background with a red cross, but it morphed over time. Different countries, different things. This one down here is kind of the basic Templar cross, but you can see all these other variations that they came up with. So why in the world are we talking about them? So let's jump into it. So there was a military order that was founded with the approval of the Pope, called the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and the Temple of Jerusalem in 1120. So these soldiers were meant to escort the pilgrims that were going to the Holy Land, and the Crusades had been going on, and so there was, for whatever reason, a pile of people that wanted to go to the Holy Land, but of course, easier said than done, and you could get waylaid along the way. So this group of Templars, the Temple of Jerusalem, was set up to protect them, to take them from to and from the Holy Land. But what happened was they turned into an incredible elite fighting force, okay, that were you know, really well known as a force to really be reckoned with. And they, one of the tenets of being a Templar was you're forbidden from retreating in battle unless you're outnumbered at least 3-1. And even then, you could only retreat by the order of the commander, or if the Templar flag went down. So you can see that from the get-go, they were pretty tough cookies. Now, not all the Knights Templar were warriors, okay? So the mission of most of the members that were Knights Templar was one of support, to get the resources which would be used to fund and equip the small percentage of members who are actually fighting in the front line. So that's still true today. In any war, the bulk of the people are involved with the logistics of getting stuff so that the people at the front can actually fight, whether it's food or ammo or whatever. So there are 3 classes within the order of the Templars. The highest class was the knight. So when a candidate was sworn into the order, they made the knight a monk, and they wore white robes. And the knights could hold no property, receive no private letters. They could not be married or betrothed. They could not have any vow in any other order, and they could not deal, could not have debt more than they could pay, and they couldn't be sick, no infirmities. So that was the highest class. The next class was the priest class, and this is similar to a modern day military chaplain. They wore green robes, and they conducted religious services, led prayers, and were assigned record keeping and letter writing. They always wore gloves unless they were giving Holy Communion. And then the vast bulk of the people were the mounted men at arms. This is the common class. They were called brothers. They were usually assigned 2 horses each and held many positions. They would be the guard, the steward, the squire for the night, other support vocations. They wore black or brown robes and were partially garbed in chain mail or plate mail. And the armor was not as complete as the knights. And because of this, the warriors were well trained and very well armed. And even their horses were trained to fight in combat, fully armored. So the combination of soldier and monk was a very powerful one. And as to the Knights Templar, martyrdom in battle was one of the most glorious ways to die. So there you have it.
Yeah.
Or to
Wow.
It's similar to any of these cult military things that, you know, the Delta Force that the US has, or the SEALs, you know, if you die in battle, that's fantastic.
Right, but the thing of the monk and the soldier,
Right, that's unusual. Right.
but that's like the
Well, yeah,
Japanese. and-
yeah, the Japanese with the in 1620, when it was actually a whole bunch of Buddhist monks that were armed
Right.
that stormed the imperial palace was in Kyoto, and they stormed it, and that set up the what was it called? There was a dynasty that went from 1620 to the 1860s or so. So it was a pretty powerful set of monks that battled. And similarly in you know, in China, in India,
Right,
with the monks that were there. So
well, they all started out as warrior monks, and they had all these.
right, they became monks after proving that they were warriors. So the
But that's where a
Templar,
lot of these, you know, kind of esoteric practices come from.
right,
It was about focusing and cultivating your prowess, not
Mhm.
just your discipline to sit for hours, but your
right,
concentration and your focus and ability to, you know, go without food
Right.
and water and sleep and
right.
all of that. That led to our practice, our meditation
Mhm.
practices and everything.
Yeah, that's true. So the Templar order was actually founded by this Saint Bernard, I think of Clairview, who approached the Pope. He was a very well-known monk, and he said we need to protect the pilgrims. But he had this idea that a very small force under the right conditions could defeat a much larger enemy. And the Templars always kept looking for the tactics that would allow them to, with a small force, overcome a much larger force. Which, and they did this enough times that they were, really held in awe by whenever they showed up on the battlefield, the other side would go, uh-oh, the Templars are here. So there was a battle in 1177, and this was where Saladin, who was probably the greatest Muslim military leader of the time, was pushing toward Jerusalem in the Holy Land from the south. He had 26,000 soldiers, and Jerusalem's King Baldwin IV had about 500 knights. So pretty big mismatch, 26,000 to 500, plus the support people. So there might be another couple thousand support people. So kind of 10 to 1. 80 Templar knights in their own entourage attempted to go reinforce. They met Saladin's troops at Gaza, but they were considered too small a force to be worth fighting. So Saladin turned his back on them and headed with his army toward Jerusalem. Big mistake. Once Saladin and his army had moved on, the Templars were able to join with King Baldwin's forces, and together they proceeded north along the coast. Saladin made a key mistake. Instead of keeping his forces together, he permitted his army to temporarily to, hold on a second, just a sec. Yeah, Paul, what's up?
Just drove to my house and drove back here without my computer.
Oh,
So if I drive to my house, we might not have it anyway because I don't have bandwidth at my house. That's why I'm at Faithworks. Were you planning on being on leave?
I'm right now. I'm just in the middle of teaching the class, so if I get down early, I was going to join. So that's where I'm at. Okay. Yep. Somebody else wants me to host a class.
Oh,
Anyway, the Templar, Saladin made this key mistake. He kept, instead of keeping his forces together, he split his army to had them spread out and pillage various villages on the way to Jerusalem. And so the Templars saw this, and they launched a surprise ambush against Saladin and his bodyguard. Saladin's army was spread too thin to adequately defend themselves. But they even though they're outnumbered, if you spread them out at any point, you could be fighting, even numbers. And so Saladin's forces were forced to fight a losing battle. They retreated back to the south and ended up with only 1/10 of their original number, which is pretty horrendous. This wasn't the final battle with Saladin, but it did bring a year of peace for the kingdom of Jerusalem, and it made the Templars heroic. So you can see who you're up against here. Another key tactic of the Templars was the squadron charge, a small group of knights and their heavily armed war horses. Remember, these war horses had armor on them. These are like tanks charging you. They'd gather into a tight unit and gallop at full speed at the enemy lines. And boy, would you want to stand there and
yeah, really.
Take on these horses that are armored? A standard thing was they would have archers that would try and shoot arrows to take out the horses, so that you'd have to abandon the horse and fight on foot. But here the horses are armored. The arrows wouldn't do anything. So you know, this sort of onslaught was really terrifying and would frequently break a hole in the enemy lines. And now you've got things split, and this is all to your advantage. So they were really incredible soldiers. Now let's go back to where they came from. Initially, they were an order of poor monks, and the official papal sanction made the Knights Templar a charity across all of Europe. So further resources came in when new members joined the order, because when they joined the order, they had to take oaths of poverty. So they donated large amounts of their original cash or property to the order. And then on top of that, they had business dealings. This is where they really shined. Since the monks themselves were sworn to poverty, but they had the strength of a large and trusted international infrastructure behind them, the nobles would occasionally use them as a kind of bank or power of attorney. So if a noble wished to join the crusade, this might entail an absence of years from home, and they would provide the monies to keep things running. So some nobles started to place all of their wealth and businesses under the controls of the Templar to safeguard it until they returned from the Crusades. And the financial power became huge, and the majority of the infrastructure was devoted not to combat, but to economic pursuits. So the Templars are credited with using letters of credit. So you would be at some place A, and you wanted to travel to B, but the problem was there were all kinds of people that could potentially kill you or rob you on the way. And so instead of actually taking any money with you, you would at A, you would give all the money that was required for a so-called letter of credit. And then you would go down the road, and when you got to B, there was a secret code that they had worked out. And then you would at B receive all the money that you wanted. And then they embellished it so that you could stop along the way and here and there and the other place where there's a Templar monastery, and they would give you part of the money. So it was a very clever banking invention that the Templars had, and of course the Templars had lots of money.
It was really the beginning of modern
Yeah, they created modern banking
banking.
in Western Europe. Okay, so
Wow.
by 1150, the original mission of guarding pilgrims had really changed into the mission of guarding their valuables through these letters of credit. And then pilgrims would again visit a Templar house in their home country, deposit their deeds and valuables. The Templars would give them a letter which would describe their holdings. Some people believe that the letters were encrypted with a cipher alphabet based on the Maltese cross, but there is some disagreement on this. But there was some sort of coding, because clearly if you have this letter with you and you get robbed, they have the letter, but if the letter is encrypted, it doesn't do you any good. And furthermore, you don't know the secret code word for unlocking what's going on here. So, they thought it was a pretty safe thing. So while traveling, the pilgrims could present the letter to other Templars along the way and withdraw some funds for their accounts. So they were safe, they weren't carrying any valuables, and the power of the Templars increased accordingly. So the Knights' involvement in banking grew over time into the new basis for money as Templars became increasingly involved in banking activities. So one indication of their powerful political connection is that the Templars' involvement in usury did not lead to more controversy within the order and the church at large. Remember, the church felt the usury was a sin, but it was okay for the Templars to do it because, of course, if the church does it, that's not a sin, which is how they keep score. So officially, the idea of lending money in return for interest was forbidden. The order sidestepped this with clever loopholes, such as the stipulation that the Templars retained the rights to the production of mortgaged property, and so forth. Or as one researcher put it, since they weren't allowed to charge interest, they charged rent instead. So some things never change. Now, their holdings were necessary to support all of these campaigns that were done in the Holy Land. In 1180, a Burgundian noble required 3 square kilometers of estate to support himself as a knight. But by 1260, this had risen to 15.6 square kilometers. So that's a factor of 5 increase in just 80 years. You get some idea of the power that's going on here. So the Templars supported up to 4,000 horses and pack animals in any given time. So if provisions of the rule were followed, these horses had extremely high maintenance costs due to the heat in the Crusader states in the Eastern Mediterranean. They had a high mortality rate, both due to disease and, of course, the Turkish bowman always aimed at the knight's horse rather than the knight. In addition, the high mortality rates of the knights themselves, regularly 90% in battle, not including wounded. So you can see you get virtually wiped out. This resulted in extremely high campaign costs due to the needs to recruit and train more knights, I'll say. It's interesting, just as an aside, in World War II, the US Army was fighting against the Japanese in the islands in the Pacific. And the US Army had a doctrine that if you sustained at least 20% casualties, then you were no longer an effective fighting unit. And they discovered that the Japanese were sustaining 80% casualties
Right.
and still being a formidable fighting unit. So they asked Ruth Benedict, who was an anthropologist, to write up a report, which she did. It's available as a book today. It's called The Chrysanthemum and the Sword. And so it describes the Japanese mindset that on the one hand, there's this love of beauty, that's the chrysanthemum, with this love for exquisite art and beautiful architecture and buildings and gardens and everything that goes with it.
Beautiful women.
And the women, and then on the other hand, the chrysanthemum and the sword side of things is the warrior side, that they believe that their emperor is descended from God, and that if their emperor says go to war, they will go to war, and they will fight literally until the last person, and so it goes. So the Templars are the same ilk. So the Templars' political connections and awareness of the essential urban and commercial nature of all of these communities in the Holy Land led them to a position of significant power, not just in the Holy Land, but in Europe. So they owned large tracts of land in Europe and in the Middle East. They built churches and castles. They bought farms, vineyards. There was all kinds of manufacturing and import-export. They had their own fleet of ships. And for a time, they even owned the entire island of Cyprus. So these are, non-trivial amounts of money. Their success was their downfall. That many others looked at them. The two most powerful rivals were the Knights Hospitalier and the Teutonic Knights. So they're both charitable organizations. They're there to help the poor and protect them. And they had various hospitals and poorhouses that they set up, but they were nothing at all like the scale that the Templars had. So various nobles also had concerns about the Templars because of all the money. And the nobles, of course, needed money to fight all the wars that were going on in the Middle Ages. So there was, in the early 1190s, there was a very short and powerful, effective campaign led by Richard the Lionheart, who was the King of England and the leader of the Third Crusade, together with his allies, the Templars. And they went after Saladin, the great general of Islam, and recovered much of the Christian territory, and in name and in number revived a number of these Crusader states that were there before, but their overall outlines were diminished somewhat. So they did what they could. There was the Kingdom of Jerusalem, though its capital was at Accra, which is on the coast, the Mediterranean. The Templars made that their new headquarters. To the north was the county of Tripoli, but the Muslims retained control of the Syrian coast around Latakia for some time, and the Principality of Antioch further to the north was no longer contiguous to the other Crusader states. But nevertheless, the Third Crusade, in which Richard relied heavily on the Templars, saved the Holy Land for the Christians and went a long way toward restoring the future of France. So in he was abetted by these military orders who had great castles that stood like islands of the power of France amid the Muslim torrent. And more than ever, the Crusader states were relying on the military orders in their castles and on the field of battle, and the power of the orders grew. In fact, at no point in their history would the Templars be more powerful than in the 1200s.
This is also when labyrinths became big in the Christian.
Yeah, this is when they're building
tradition.
Chartres.
Right.
Yeah.
And all that was, from the wealth and the incredible technology that they were developing at the time. It was brand new phenomenon. But the labyrinths became a symbolic substitute for the pilgrimage to Mecca that they were all supposed to make. They would do a labyrinth instead, often on their knees.
Hmm.
And their kind of local cathedral, which is an order above a regular church. They were for districts around them, and there they would do this symbolic journey to Jerusalem for the salvation of their soul that was too treacherous to undertake because of the Crusades. It was just insane.
Yeah.
And they were doing this as their Christian duty, and the whole world was just on fire.
Sure.
With these incredible ransacking exercises that they were doing, and they're referring to Islam as the barbarians.
Right. If anything, the Islams were the more civilized.
Right, and they were kind of more minding their own business.
Yeah. This is also when the Baghdad, when they had this whole renaissance in medicine and mathematics and all the sciences. The Western Europeans were the barbarians. So anyway, the Templars just had all through the 1200s just were on a roll, but they were a state within a state. So they were incredibly wealthy. They paid no taxes, and they had a large standing army, which by papal decree could move freely throughout all of Europe. So this was not a good place to be. And the King of France, Philip IV, mistrusted the Templars. In part, it's because they had a lot of money and he wanted to fight a lot of battles to go grow France, grow its territory. And the Templars, of course, wouldn't give him money except on their terms. He just wanted to steal the money. In addition to this, there were these Teutonic Knights that ruled Prussia, again, under a charter issued by the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor. And they were concerned that the Templars in the southeast of France were planning the same sort of thing here. So it's building up to a really bad scene. And finally, what happens is in 1306, the Templars had supported a coup on Cyprus, which forced King Henry II of Cyprus to abdicate his throne in favor of his brother, Amalric of Tyre. And Philip had inherited the land in the region of Champagne, which was the Templars' headquarters at the time. So what happens here? Oops. Let's see. The Templars no longer had a presence in the Holy Land. They were actually pushed out, and Philip, the King of France, had inherited an impoverished kingdom from his father, and he was already deeply in debt to the Templars, so he's not going to get any more money out of them. And so with all of this here, there seemed to be the discovery and the repression of the Templars' heresy, whereby the Capetian monarchy claimed for itself the mystic foundations of the papal theocracy. In other words, the King of France made a power play to go grab everything the Templars had. And this was the last step of appropriating these foundations, which had begun with a papal rift at the time of Boniface VIII, being the ultimate defender of the Catholic faith. The Capetian king was invested with a Christ-like function that put him above the Pope. Really? So what was at stake in the Templars' trial then was the establishment of a royal theocracy. You can see where this is going. So they scheduled a coup whereby on Friday the 13th, which is why everyone says beware Friday the 13th. This was Friday, October 13th in 1307. The French went out there and just jumped into all kinds of Templar estates and arrested them and then tortured them as to where in the world the money was and where was the Tower of Chinon, and forced them into admitting heresies and other sacrilegious offenses, and then they put them to death. So you know, the thing about this was that even though this was a surprise, quote unquote, a few days before this, Philip, the King of France, was in Paris, and he saw the Templars unloading huge amounts of gold and having it in their Paris location. And he said, boy, oh boy, we're in a good shape. Later this week, it's going to be Friday the 13th. We're going to go jump them. When they jumped them, they discovered that the gold was all gone. The Templars had clearly figured out, someone had told them about what was going on here. They couldn't keep this big a thing secret because it was all done by sending letters around to people. So the Templars had figured it out, and all the treasury was gone out of Paris. And on top of that, the Templars had a fleet of ships that they had that was in, I think, Le Havre, and the ships were all gone on the morning of Friday the 13th. They were there on the night of the October 12th, but they set sail that night and were gone. And so the French king really didn't get any money out of all this. So let's go ahead. On August 12th, 1308, the charges against all of these different French Templars would have become more outrageous, and including that the Templars worshipped idols, especially an idol made up of a cat and a head, and the head had three faces on it, and there were many charges here, all of which were fabricated. These were identical to charges that had earlier been issued against Pope Boniface VIII, the accusations of denying Christ, spitting and urinating on the cross, devil worship, and of the 138 Templars, many of them old men that were questioned in Paris. 105 of them confessed, quote unquote, to denying Christ during the secret Templar initiations, and 103 confessed to an obscene kiss being part of the ceremonies, and 123 said they spat on the cross. So throughout the trial, there was never any physical evidence of wrongdoing, no independent witnesses. The only proof was obtained through confessions by torture. So the Templars reached out to the Pope for assistance, and Pope Clement wrote letters to King Philip questioning the arrests. But the dominant view was that Philip, King of France, who had seized the treasury and broken up this banking system, was jealous of the Templars' wealth and power. And he owed them a lot of money, and so it goes. So it became impossible to believe that under the influence of his carefully chosen advisors, the same ones that had persecuted Pope Boniface VIII, Philip actually believed the charges to be true. Philip had clearly made up the accusations. They were nearly identical to those against the Pope. He did not believe any of the Templars really had been party to these activities. And in fact, he invited Jacques de Molay, who was the head of the Paris operations, the chief Knight Templar in France, to be a pallbearer at the funeral of Catherine I, the very day before that he was arrested. Jacques de Molay was roasted on a slowly turning spit and roasted to death. So there's a popular thread of a conspiracy theory in the book Holy Blood, Holy Grail that says the Templars had a fleet of 18 ships at La Rochelle that they used to escape arrest. And supposedly this fleet was laden with knights and treasures. And this was based on a single item of testimony from Jean de Chalon, who says he'd heard people talking that Gerard de Villiers had put to sea with 18 galleys, and the brother, Hugh de Chalon, fled with the whole treasury of the brother Hughes de Perrault. So, however, aside from the sole source of this statement, the transcript indicates it's hearsay, and these are the things that come up when you have them. Who knows if there was any ships there at all, and what they had. But it does appear, as we'll see in other things, that there were some ships there, and they set sail actually for Scotland. So in the book Holy Blood, Holy Grail, the knights allegedly boarded these ships and escaped to Scotland. But in some versions, the Templars even claimed to left for North America, and they buried a treasure in Nova Scotia in a place called Oak Island. And there's a movie that came out in 2004 that dealt with this with Nicolas Cage. It's very entertaining. So many historians have questioned the plausibility of this. So, for example, someone said, well, the Templars did have ships that carried personnel, pilgrims, and supplies across the Mediterranean between the East and the West. But if the Hospital after 1312 is any guide, they didn't have any more than 4 of these warships and a few other ships And if they needed any more, they just hired them. They couldn't spare ships to indulge in world exploration. The records of the port of La Rochelle show the Templars were exporting wine by ship. So this wasn't a fleet in any modern sense. And the transport, they would have been transport vessels rather than warships. And the Templars probably hired them as they needed rather than buying their own. And the ships would have been very small by modern standards, sailing too low on the water to be able to withstand the heavy waves and winds of the open Atlantic, and suited for use only in the relatively shallow waters of the continental shelf. And so it goes. So in 2001, someone discovered a copy of the Chinon parchment, which was dated August of 1308 in the Vatican secret archives, that indicated that Pope Clement the Fifth absolved the leaders of the Templars of all crimes in 1308. And this was published, and the parchment that's there was addressed to Philip IV of France, and said that absolution was granted to all those Templars who confessed to heresy and restored them to the sacraments and to the unity of the church. So there you have it. Okay, now we're going to go back to here. And we're going to, that's the Templars side of things. And now we're going to talk about a family that's in Scotland, in Rosslyn, Scotland, the Sinclairs. And they had a lot of interesting tie-ins to the Templars. Here you can see their coat of arms for the Sinclairs. And again, it's a cross. It's not a red cross, it's a black cross. But it is what it is. And here's a picture here of the chapel that was built in 1446. So it's well after 1307, when the Templars were raided by the King of France. It took, it was going to take 40 years to build. He started building it in 1446. He died in 1484. So his son just said, okay, we're going to go at it for another 2 years. He finished the choir. He said, that's it, we're done, here it is. But you can see there's some very bizarre figures here all over this thing that don't look at all like anything you would find in a normal church, which is one of the things about the Sinclairs. Why did they build this chapel and their ties to the Templars? So let's go into it some more. So the St Clairs actually appear to be Vikings. They came out of the Earl of Moore in Norway. And in the latter part of the 9th century, this Earl fought alongside the Norwegian king, who made him a Jarl, or an Earl. And he was given a whole pile of land here, all of which lay in the vicinity of the modern town of Trondheim, Norway, which is, I'm pretty sure Trondheim is above the Arctic Circle. It is way north in Norway. So he in turn had 3 legitimate sons, and the problem was he also had 3 illegitimate sons. Why not? So he accompanied the Norwegian king on his campaign to the Shetland, to the Orkneys and the Hebrides Islands. And he left the Isle of Man there in ruins. But unfortunately, Ivar was killed. And as compensation, the king gave the earldom, gave the earldom of Shetland and Orkney, as well as all the other things that they had. Thank you. So they're amassing land at this point, being Vikings. So then he passed on the rule to his brother, who went off with Thorstein the Red and conquered a whole bunch more of Scotland here. And after Sigurd's death, his son ruled for 1 year and then he died childless. So his son, Ragnald's son, Halad, became the next earl, but he proved really to be ineffectual. And so Ragnar had to do something, and he decided that which of his surviving sons would become the Earl of Orkney and Shetland. And he simplified the problem by deciding to immigrate to Ireland, this one son. So that takes him out of it. And so now they've got a succession going on, but for some reason, this other son declared his wish to carry on the family tradition of raiding and pillaging, and announced he was going to raid the western coast of Europe. So the only one left there in Orkney was Einar. So Einar ruled Orkney for many years and introduced the custom of digging peat, the turf, for fuel in Scotland, because firewood was in short supply. There's hardly any trees there. If you go there, they talk about the Scottish moors, but it's just green fields. There's no trees. So strangely for a Viking, he died in his bed, but he left 3 sons. And let's see. Rolf, who was known as the Ganger because of his great size, sailed southward to the northern coast of France, and that was the last anyone heard of him. He had an unsuccessful siege of the city of Chartres, and so King Charles the Simple decided to use him as a buffer against further Viking incursions, and made peace with him in 912. So the treaty awarding Rolf the dukedom of the territories became known as Normandy. The land of the Northmen was signed at the castle St Clair sur Epte. So we start to see where the word St Clair comes from. This treaty refers to Rolf by the Latin version of his name, Rollo, which is used thereafter. So Rollo was given the province of Normandy as a vassal of the King of France, conditional on his marriage to the king's daughter Giselle, and the conversion of him and all of his party to Christianity. So part of the ritual of signing the solemn binding treaty was an act of homage to the king. Rollo was supposed to kiss the king's foot as a sign of allegiance. Feeling this task was beneath him, he delegated one of his senior lieutenants, a tall, strapping man more than 6 feet in height, to take his place. The Viking gravely bent double, took the king's foot in his hand, raised the king's foot to his lips. As he stood up to his full height, the king tipped over backwards from his stool and lay floundering upside down like an upturned crab. Probably not a good thing to do. So Rolf and his senior officers were baptized, and there was a fountain there with a spring named in honor of St. Clair, who was martyred there in 884. And so they start to get linked to this name, St. Clair. There are a lot of villages in Normandy that were named after the saint, and the Saint's Day was celebrated in these areas. All through, these are all just towns all through Normandy. But after a long-held belief among the St. Clair family that St. Clair sur Epte was as important as it was in Norman history, it never actually belonged to Rollo or any of his successors. The Chaumont family owned the castle and the land for several centuries, and the lands themselves were part of the Ile-de-France under the aegis of the king and not part of Normandy. So according to all of the this of the St. Clair writing in 1905, it's highly unlikely that the family used the name St. Clair as its family name. It's the town of St. Clair near St. Lo, near the western limit of Bessin. That's the true origin of the name of the noble house of St. Clair. Okay, so let's see. Wait, we should be in what happened to slideshow mode. Okay. So we have here, these Vikings are going crazy in Normandy. And they actually went over to, this is bizarre. The Vikings went across England from the east coast of England all the way over to Stonehenge. And then they stopped at Stonehenge like they were looking for something, some spiritual or mystic thing, and they didn't find it. And then they went to the south coast of Brittany in France, where there's a series of stones laid out called Carcassonne that are very, there are thousands of them, okay? And they're not at all tall stones. They're, 1 foot tall, but they're laid out in these roads that wind all over the place. And the Vikings went there and they were very happy with that. That was a great place to be. And this is right next to Normandy. So there could very well be some tie-ins between these Vikings that have become the St. Clairs and looking for something there that was spiritual or mystic. The other thing that comes about here is no one knows what really happened here. That's clear. Let's see. We just did this. So the thing that's hard to understand is, why would these aristocratic families of France marry this bunch of crazy Vikings that are pirates and are fierce warriors that are so uncouth? And it's, I think it's simply the in those times, and it still goes on today, they bind the families together through marriages, and that means that you're not going to go fight against one another. You're going to make peace, and both sides will win. So having said that, there were a lot of some of the oldest families in Europe ended up marrying into these Vikings here, and you really wondered what's going on. There's a group of these families that together were called the Rex Deus. So they're the hoi polloi. There's the biggest of the biggest. They are all descended from 24 high priests of the Temple of Jerusalem of the time of Jesus. Now, we have no idea where they got this number, 24 high priests, and they're all Jews too. It doesn't say they were doing this with Jesus. It says they were in the high priests in the temple. So go figure. I don't understand. So to keep the bloodlines pure, they restricted the matrimonial alliances wherever possible to other families in this Rex Deus. So they have this clique here, and they're replicating this traditional behavior that's found in biblical Israel, for example, but in many other places. So most people are aware the priestly class was hereditary and was drawn from the tribe of Levi, but less commonly known is the existence within the Levites of the Cohens, an even more exclusive group who were chosen the high priests, and the general Levitical priesthood were allowed by Jewish law and tradition to marry outside the tribe. How convenient. So a Cohen, on the other hand, was not merely forbidden to do this, but was strictly enjoined to marry only within the Cohen family, thus preserving, or so it was believed, an unbroken and direct tie to the priesthood instituted by Moses. So who knows? This is what they believed. The families of Rex Deus claim to preserve the true teachings of Jesus for future generations, and they're dedicated to bringing about the kingdom of heaven upon earth. The new Jesus came to reveal and not to redeem, and as their version of the true teaching of Jesus was considerably at variance with the dogma of Holy Mother, the Church, they had to keep their traditions secret. Otherwise, they'd be persecuted, to put it mildly. So the Church, as the self-appointed guardian of divinely revealed truth, instituted a regime of intolerance and repression against all those who had the temerity to disagree with its teaching, and those who didn't swallow the church dogma, hook, line, and sinker, were deemed heretics. So William attached himself to a branch of the royal family of Saxons and accompanied Atheling and his daughter Margaret from Normandy to Hungary. So he's known as William the Seemly because of his courage and courtesy, and he was chosen with Bartholomew Ladislaus Leslin to escort Princess Margaret to Scotland, where she was to marry Malcolm Canmore, King of the Scots. So as a reward for his services, he is granted the barony of Rosslyn in life rent. He later commanded the Scots army when they fought against William the Conqueror, who was by now the King of England. William the Seemly was killed in a skirmish with the English in Northumberland. So the first Sinclair, born in Scotland, we finally get there, is Henri de Sinclair, who was confirmed by King Malcolm as Baron of Rosslyn, and also Baron of Pentland. He too carried the family enmity with the royal house of England. The Scots do not get along with the English, and took the side of his deposed brother, King Henry I of England. And he accompanied him on his first crusade to the Holy Land in 1095. So they traveled across Europe with a crusading army led by Godefroy de Bouillon, the head of the royal house of Flanders. And after the capture of Jerusalem in 1099, Godefroy de Bouillon, whose family were Rex Deus, was offered the crown of the Holy Land, but refused the honor and chose instead to rule as protector of the Holy Sepulchre. So Godefroy died childless, succeeded by his brother Baldwin, showed no reluctance in accepting the crown, and reigned as King Baudouin I of Jerusalem, and he was succeeded by one of the most Baudouin II, who was the king at the time of the foundation of the Order of the Knights Templar. So here we go, the linkages. The founders of the Knights Templar and the first Grand Master, Hugh de Payen, reputedly traveled to the Holy Land with another Henri St Clair from Normandy. Another co-founder of the Order of the Knights Templar was a relative of the Duke of Burgundy and the uncle of one of the most influential people in medieval history, Bernard of Clairvaux, who was the person who asked the Pope to create the Order Knight Templar. So both the co-founders were vassals of the Count of Champagne, and they played a strange and mysterious role in Templar tradition and the generation of the stories of the Holy Grail, which is the bloodline of Jesus and Mary Magdalene that runs through them. The Counts of Champagne owed their allegiance to the King of France, Holy Roman Emperor, and the Duke of Burgundy. And despite this, they were still virtually independent princes who occupied land somewhat larger than the country of Wales, which lay to the east and southeast of Paris. So they had a huge amount of land in France. The Counts of Champagne were linked by blood and marriage to the St Clairs. These are the Capetian kings of France, the Duke of Burgundy, and the Norman and Plantagenet kings of England. So in 1104, Count of Champagne, Hugh I, met in secret conclave with members of the royal noble families of Brienne, and so forth, all of whom were Rex Deus. And immediately afterwards, he departed for the Holy Land. He did not return until 1108, and then he went back again in 1114 and made a huge donation to the Cistercian order, on which was built the Abbey of Clairvaux, which is in memory of Bernard of Clairvaux, its first abbot. So the Order of the Poor Knights, or commonly the Knights Templar, was founded in Jerusalem in 1118. The new order of 9 knights, known as Les Milices du Christ, the militia of Christ, announced that their vocation was to protect pilgrimage routes within the Holy Land, but acting on information provided by the secret editions of Rex Deus, the 9 knights began a mammoth excavation immediately beneath the quarters they had been granted, which are known as the Stables of Solomon. So they're apparently underneath the mount. There's this plateau there in Jerusalem that today has this mosque, and it has a Christian church, and they were underneath this. This was where supposedly the Temple of Solomon was, the first temple in Jerusalem, and also the stables was underneath it. So no one knows what they found, but they found something. And the result of this was they became immediately incredibly rich after 9 years. So they returned to Europe with their discoveries, visiting Provence, Normandy, England, and Scotland. In Scotland, they went straight to the St Clair lands at Rosslyn, and in fact, several have claimed that Hugh de Péan was related to the St Clairs by marriage, but the new order was granted their rule, the Council of Troyes, which was dominated by the thinking of Bernard of Clairvaux, who wrote what we now call an advertising blurb for the order, entitled "In Praise of the New Knighthood." So the Templars now are really getting linked up with the St. Clairs. Following the return of the 9 knights to Europe, the order received numerous donations of property throughout Provence, the south of France, the Ile-de-France, Normandy, Christian, Spain, Portugal, England, Scotland, etc. And they were given a tract of land which adjoined the estates of Rosslyn. So their rise to wealth, power, and influence was very rapid and sustained. They acquired more land in the Low Countries, Denmark, Norway, Poland, Germany, Italy, and Hungary over the next 50 years. And they basically covered all of Europe and became skilled in farming. They protected the pilgrims, of course, and they ended up having a fleet which was built in the shipyards of Venice. Notice that this contradicts what this guy said before, that they didn't have any ships. They became long-term allies of the Republic of Venice, and their combined naval might helped sustain the Christian kingdom of Jerusalem against the growing power of the Muslim enemies. And the profits from all this were used to maintain numerous castles and establishments they owned in the Holy Land, where they were in effect Europe's first professional full-time army since the Roman Empire. So the Templars had many commercial interests, and learning from their Muslim adversaries, they adopted the Sufi instrument known as the note of hand, which became the letter of credit, and used it in financial transactions, protecting the trade routes. They were busy through all of this. The most visible reminder of the activities of the Knights Templar is architecture. The entire development of the Gothic style, according to architectural historians, did not evolve from its Romanesque predecessor. It's often attributed to discoveries made by the Knights in their excavations in Jerusalem, which could be. The Romans knew quite a lot of mechanical engineering, and so these flying buttresses were, a real innovation architecturally. They were involved in the financing of many of the great cathedrals, such as the Chartres and Amiens, and these towering spires are really a permanent memorial to the order of the Knights Templar. So the other thing was that they were with craft masons known as the Children of Solomon, who physically built the cathedrals, but their precise relationship with these craft masons is really unknown right now. Were they in the same order, or were they, what was it? One thing that's certain is the Knights Templar ensured it always be governed by a Grand Master drawn from the ranks of this Rex Deus group of families. So any trained knight of noble birth could join the order, but the ones that served on the inner council had to be plugged into this Rex Deus. One family name that remains intertwined the order from the time of the Crusade was that of the St Clairs of Rosslyn. So the persecution began, as we said, on the 13th of October. After many years of torture, etc., the Templars were really in a world of hurt. We covered all this. We know that the St. Clairs of Rosslyn were members of the secret group that had founded and directed the order throughout its history. So it's hardly a surprise that their wealth, which was already considerable, became far greater after the suppression of the Templar order. And the lords of Rosslyn traveled. They were accompanied by at least 100 mounted gentlemen, and the ladies of Rosslyn were attended by 80 ladies in waiting, and they dined off of gold plate. So you can see this is not the low rent sort of caravan. A number of the knights sought refuge in Scotland, the Knights Templar. There was a Scottish war, a civil war in Scotland for the crown. And on the one hand was Robert the Bruce, who was excommunicated for the ritual murder of his rival, John Comyn, on church premises. So as this papal act did not produce the desired result of Bruce's deposition, his nobles were also excommunicated. And then the entire country was put under papal interdict. So the Pope decided to excommunicate everybody. This meant that the Pope's writ did not run in the kingdom of the Scots, making it a safe refuge for the Templar Knights. So, and of course, the Inquisition was going full bore at this point. So by excommunicating everybody in Scotland, they're no longer in the church, and that was a safe place for the Templars. By the way, the other thing that happened, like in Portugal, the Knights Templar, instead of all being excommunicated, they simply changed the name of their group. So it wasn't called Knights Templar anymore. It was called something else, but everything else was the same. And that was good enough for the Pope. He didn't do anything. So go figure. The military skills were brought, they really helped out Robert the Bruce, who was fighting against the English king. There was a battle here in 1314, and the Scots were heavily outnumbered, but they had a strong defensive position to repulse repeated attacks by the Brits and by the English. So as the day would close, the English mounted an overwhelming assault. And just as they're doing this, a band of Scottish reserves comes over the brow of the hill. And surprise, surprise, they're all wearing white with red crosses. So the English army took one look and said, we're not going up against the Templars. And they ran, okay? It isn't, it's simply, get real. Do you really want to go fight these Templars? So Robert the Bruce laid the foundations by the Declaration of Arbroath, which defined the Scottish independence for all time. And Sir Henry St Clair of Rosslyn was one of the signatories. And the new king was a realist. Scottish tradition said he became a sovereign Grand Master of the Templar order. and he advised them to go underground and operate in secret. The reason why is not hard to find. For Robert the Bruce knew that he would have to reestablish relations with the Pope and with countries who acknowledged papal power, and he didn't want to reward the allies who had saved his throne by allowing them to become visible targets of the Inquisition. So the fate of the Templar estates in Scotland was different from elsewhere in Europe. Some reverted to the families who donated them, but they had close ties to the order. The remainder passed into the hands of the Knights Hospitalier. This group had, again, a lot of poorhouses and hospitals. But anyway, there they are. They're now established in Scotland. And Robert the Bruce began making his international alliances. And the end result was that the Scottish and French branches of this Rex Deus were formalized in a way that was to influence political and economic development of Europe well into the 18th century and beyond. So then we finally get to 1396. Henry St Clair, the Earl of Orkney, Lord of Rosslyn, places his fleet under the command of two of his sons, and they sailed to explore the North Atlantic and visit America, not once, but at least twice. So steeped in Templar tradition and spirituality, they sailed in the manner of Earl Henry's Viking ancestors. Remember, the Vikings had already sailed there, so they knew that there was America there. They left proof carved in stone on both sides of the Atlantic as documentary evidence that is accepted by the majority of academics. The most enduring legacy is not the round Templar church that we saw in Newport, Rhode Island, but the enduring friendship and amity that lasted over 600 years between the worldwide clan St. Clair and the Micmac people of northeastern Canada. These are the natives. This friendship was based on the beginning of shared spiritual values and the principles of truth and justice, values that ensured that these voyages would be of enduring peace, respect, and tolerance, completely free from the lasting legacy of distrust, hatred, and genocide that marred almost every other contact between the white invader and the Native American peoples. So although the voyages had little immediate political and commercial impact, they acted as beacons to a centuries-long process of spiritually inspired actions that affect us all today. Earl's grandson, William St. Clair, transformed the craft guilds of Scotland, of which he was hereditary Grand Master, into the fraternities of Freemasons, whose beliefs and traditions molded the thinking of the founding fathers of the United States of America. So the spiritually inspired brotherhood gave the world an enduring and equally important political legacy, the American Constitution. The Viking colony in Greenland had, despite the harsh climate, survived 350 years and maintained trading with links to Norway, Bristol, Flanders, and Cologne. And early in the 1340s, relationships between the settlers and the Eskimos broke down and erupted into hostility. A priest was called upon to accompany a fleet of volunteers who were dispatched from the east to the western settlement to help combat the Eskimos. He reported on their arrival at the settlement, the Eskimos were in full control, and apparently the settlers had sailed away as a group, and that the settlers had just given up the true faith. Who knows where they went? So the desertion of the western settlement is confirmed by the record of Peter's Pence, which is dispatched to Rome from the island, and who declined dramatically after 1342. But the three reports reached Iceland in 1347 and later Norway, and it took some time before the Norwegian king Magnus was in a position to act, and he led an expedition to bring these lost settlers back to Christianity. They first went to Greenland, to see what was going on, and then they went over to Vinland and other places in North America. And so it goes, and each of these in Vinland would have necessitated a safe harbor and a defensible inland that was sufficiently fertile to support the members of the expedition. So he appears to split his expedition into three parties. One went up the St. Lawrence or to Hudson Bay, another went deep inland, and the third was in the earlier settlement of Leif Erikson. The one that went deep inland actually went to Minnesota, and they left a stone there. This is the Kensington runestone, which was discovered in 1898. Its inscription is dated 1362 and says that we are 8 Goths or Swedes and 22 Norwegians on an exploration journey from Vinland. We camped by a lake with 2 skerries, 1 day's journey north this stone, and we went out and fished one day, and we came home, found 10 of our men red with blood and dead. So Ave Virgo Maria, save us from evil. We have 10 men by the sea to look after our ships, and 14-day journeys from this island. So not a lot of fun. Now we get back to the chapel here, the Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland. William St Clair actually founded the chapel. He dedicated it to St. Matthew, the evangelist. And this is the third Sinclair place of worship in Rosslyn. The first was in the castle. The second was now it's a cemetery. So he founded the college to celebrate the liturgy of the hours throughout the day and night, and to celebrate the Catholic masses for all the faithful departed, and so forth. He provided an endowment to support the priests and choristers in perpetuity. And after the Scottish Reformation, the Catholic worship in the chapel was brought to an end. Which takes us to Oak Island, Nova Scotia. This is an island in Nova Scotia. The legend has it that the Templars that were in Scotland took refuge there, and then took some of their religious treasures, apparently including the Holy Grail, if you could believe this, from their sanctuary that they had in Montségur, which is in the south of France, where the Cathars were. So this book called Holy Grail Across the Atlantic presents evidence that such an event occurred, which leads to a possible role played by the ruins found in the nearby New Ross, and of course in the mysterious Oak Island Money Pit. It's called the Money Pit because many people have tried to go into this thing, and there's apparently a series of very elaborate traps that will kill you. They have iron wood beams that will come across and just screw you in two, break every bone in your body, and there's many of them. They're not obvious, and that's why it's called the Money Pit. Is people have put a lot of money into it and they have nothing to show for it. There was a wooden platforms every 10 feet or 3 meters down to at least 27 meters in depth. So it goes down at least 90 feet. Well, this is pretty impressive to go dig a hole like this. What in the world are they trying to hide down in something like this with all these traps? No one knows. And then Prince Henry St. Clair III actually came to Westford, Massachusetts. And I've actually been there and seen this. These are stones there that have inscriptions on them. This is where Sir James Gunn, who was part of Henry St. Clair's party, died there. And these stones show a galley with oar holes, probably used by Prince Henry on his expedition to New England, and so it goes. So there's no doubt that the Templars were here. So there you go. We
Wow.
we've come to the end, and so be it. This is just one of these things that's a background story that keeps showing up again and again in these two books, Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and the Da Vinci Code, where they're saying that the Holy Blood is the blood of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, and that bloodline continues till today. And apparently that has some ties to Rosslyn Chapel, not simply to the south of France, but they immigrated to Rosslyn Chapel, and so it goes. So we don't know.
Wow.
Where is it with the garden and the chalice and all of that in England?
Glastonbury?
Yeah, Glastonbury, sorry.
Yeah, Glastonbury, yeah, that no one disputes that. Glastonbury is the first Christian church, 36 AD. And the Vatican says, yeah, that's correct.
And by definition, that meant Catholic
Yeah,
at that
So-
time.
so anyway,
Wow.
there you go. We're gonna go back now and we'll do a session on music. And
Okay.
you know, music, you know, it's one of these things that grows on you. To me, I've grown more and more enamored of music every year of my life. It's amazing, and it's very deep and rich, and so we'll see. You know, judge for yourself what we do next week.
All righty.
Have a good weekend.
Any
You
questions?
too.
Any questions?
No.
Okay. Have a good. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Nighty night.